Hey guys.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Same to you. You know, for those of you watching the show, Laz and I are in holiday Gumdropville.
Yeah, I picked it.
Laz brought us to this magical land for this final DMZ of 2020.
Yes, magical.
So Laz overheard us talking about the possibility of a kid's version of the DMZ with my daughters and your sons. I don't know how your sons feel about it, but Laz and Simone are all in.
I think it could be. I think it could be fun to do a test podcast maybe and see how they do. I mean, we have to start training the next generation someday, Bill. And it's going to be many, many years from now when you and I decide to retire. But if I've learned anything from politics, it's that nepotism is key, and that you don't just let some other person come in and fill the the conservative or the liberal chair in the DMZ. You have to hand it off to a relative, a blood relative.
Dynasty, you're talking about, Matt. Dynasty.
Look, I may not have a Senate seat for someone to inherit. I have this seat, my DMZ seat, and it's worth. What is it that Blagojevich said? It's worth a lot of. Okay, we'll leave it at
He's
that.
got a good seat.
Now, I think you mentioned on the last show that people should weigh in on the comments whether this was a good idea or not.
Yeah, so anyway, one of these comments, most people said yes. Not going to mention names. I'm not going to mention names. Dad told me I couldn't. But anyway, most people said yes, so we're going to do it on audio podcast or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what Dad's going to figure
But you were
out.
very irritated that there was one negative comment.
Yes, I was irritated about that. That would be you, negative comment. Think about it.
One of the comments
There's
thought
always
it
one.
was
At least.
on principle inappropriate to use children for internet purposes.
It's just not.
Look, I have a nuanced take on that. I think that I've been critical of the conservative movement specifically for elevating young people to the stage of CPAC or to run for political office, and it can, there can be a certain exploitative show mom and dad, like in Hollywood. I forget what they call them, but. We're not those people, Bill. That's not gonna happen to us, unless, of course, this becomes our big moneymaker. In which case, then it's game on.
Okay, so we'll try to work out the specifics, Laz, and get this started soon. Okay.
Yes, and I'm going to leave Gumdropville because I have better things to do.
Okay.
All right.
Well, and let me just say, too, I think it's a fine line between shielding and sheltering your kids from the internet, because there's certainly it's a dangerous place on the internet, and there's screen time isn't necessarily good for them. But on the other hand, they are going to be growing up into a world where we have the internet and where we have technology. And it could be that being a gamer actually, or at least being a coder, is a pretty good skill to have in the future. So I try to balance that as much as possible.
I don't know if we're striking a balance, but they're certainly learning their way around screens in this time of pandemic.
Yes. I'm just afraid that if my kid, I don't want to create like an oppo drop that's going to be used against my kids in 25 years if they run for office. You said Donald Trump was a jerk back in 2021.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be the phase in history that Donald Trump was truly one of the greats.
Well, if we've learned anything other than the fact that nepotism works, if we've learned anything else, it's that the left will make Trump out. There's always the only good Republican is a former one, right? Mm-hmm. So someday, I think the left will say, you know what, Donald Trump wanted $2,000 to go to.
You're hearing that now. Donald Trump's outflanking Pelosi and Schumer. They settled for crumbs, and Trump's showing them up.
There you go. It's already starting, and he hasn't even left.
He challenged the military-industrial complex.
He was a real populist. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, Andrew Jackson, that's going to happen. So
I mean, someone will write that book. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be somebody on the left or not, but there's going to be some cottage industry just as there's an alternative set of facts now in Trump-friendly media, there'll be I'm sure, a line of books that selected facts or made-up facts that try to tell the story of the wonderful 4 years of Trump's presidency.
Right, I agree. But what I'm talking about, I think there's two sort of different types of revisionist history, okay? So obviously there are Trump loyalists who are creating an alternate reality, and they have political reasons for doing it. But there's also going to be people who have political reasons in the future to do it. And that'll be to make the current Republican president, tag Romney, look like a real Grinch.
You think tag before George P. Bush?
Whichever one. It's, again, nepotism. This thing goes full circle, okay? One of them will be made to look bad by somebody in the future, probably a liberal, progressive, who knows, reinventing Trump. But I also think that there'll be mainstream historians like the David McCullough of the day, the John Meacham of the future may talk about the Trump era or something like that. And this will not be a Trump loyalist. This is going to be someone who is, either cashing in or just reinventing.
It'll be the fresh contrarian take of the day.
Yes. That's it. Contrarian is the word that I was missing. It's going to happen.
So what do you make of Trump coming in late, trashing the deal that passed Congress almost unanimously, days left before government shutdown, days left before this Congress remains in session, and they would have no choice but to start from scratch once this Congress ends. Is there a way where Trump successfully changes the bill and gets more robust checks, or is this just playing out of spite, going to make everything go off the rails and wash his hands of it, point fingers at everybody else when it's all over?
I think the latter, Bill. I mean, look, Donald Trump had somebody in the room with Nancy Pelosi, right? I mean, wasn't Mnuchin ordained and empowered to be the person negotiating on behalf of the White House in those meetings, right?
I mean, I don't know who was in the room for the final meetings. I mean, forgive me if that reporting has happened. I'm just not personally aware of it. I mean, I know Mnuchin had been doing a lot of negotiation with Pelosi earlier. I've read that White House aides in general signaled to McConnell that the deal was acceptable to them.
Yeah.
So,
and if Trump wanted this $2,000, I think he should have championed it. I think if he had, even 2 weeks ago, as late in the game as that would have been, if he had staked a claim to this and fought for it and held demagogued it. I mean, there's populist gold to be mined there. That would have been an interesting move, and it might have worked. But to come in after the fact and blow it up like this, and Bill, you tweeted about this, but I think you're probably right. It seems like the hardest hit are Republicans, right? And specifically David Perdue. Didn't he tweet out sort of a, "We did it, we delivered," the American people in the state of Georgia, right before Trump blows up the deal, maybe?
Well, I mean, I think Republicans will pay a steep price if there is no deal at the end of the day. If Trump pocket vetoes it, so Trump could just not sign it, right, and then Congress runs out and then the deal is not there, that is, a bad case scenario for Republicans. But at least in that scenario, Perdue or Loeffler can say, well, I voted for it. It's not my fault it's not there. It's awkward that their guy is the one who blocked it, but it's not literally them. Perhaps the worst case scenario is that Trump vetoes it. there's an actual veto, it's sent back to the Senate, and there has to be a vote whether or not to override. And now Perdue and Loeffler and other Republicans are in the position of either voting to sustain the veto and going back on their previous vote.
Right.
Or actively snubbing Trump and saying, you're wrong, you shouldn't have these $2,000 checks. So like either
Trump
way, it's a bad vote for them.
Possible. I mean, this is the larger point, which is that, in not a perfect world, but like, Perdue, Trump created enough problems for them as it is. But what they'd hoped to do with this last month or whatever is simply act as if Trump doesn't exist, right? And just run as if under normal conditions you would expect a Republican to win this kind of runoff in the state of Georgia. But Trump makes that impossible. He insists on being the bride in every wedding and the corpse in every funeral, and everything has to be about him. And so they can't dodge the question or sort of just duck the question of Trump. And now he's just bringing it up again, where they're going to have, you're either with him, and you just can't sort of tacitly be with him and just sort of be loyal. Like he demands, there has to be a bloodletting.
I was always a little concerned about Ossoff and Warnock making checks a major issue in the runoff because they could not control what was going to happen. If they say, you should have checks, and then Loeffler and Perdue say, okay, here you go, then it's not much of an argument, a wedge issue for Ossoff and Warnock. And Perdue and Loeffler are on the verge of, checkmating that angle. If this gets blown up in some way, Ossoff and Warnock can say, and I think this is the general frame which works best for them, that Perdue and Loeffler are partisans first and partisans last. They don't work across the aisle. They don't get things done. They'll salute to Donald Trump, but he's not going to be there in 2 weeks, and they won't work with him. We'll work with the president. We'll work with Republicans in the Senate. We'll get things done. These guys aren't doers, and we are.
It's a pretty compelling message, and Trump is making that a compelling message. And for what? Again, if he really wanted the $2,000 as a populist, and budget deficit be damned, right? At that point, like spending doesn't matter. It's going to be more expensive. Although
put a pin on that, because I want to circle back to that point.
Okay. So let's assume that Trump sincerely really wants the $2,000 per person. He could have fought for it. He could have championed it. It would have been probably smart politics for Trump. Maybe he could have gone out on something of a high note, cast as a populist or something like that. But what he did instead was what Trump always does, and part of the reason that Trump lost is that it's he can't negotiate in good faith. He won't negotiate in good faith. You can't trust him. He's capricious. Whoever the last person that talked to him, he flies off the handle. He does things on a whim. All these things just reinforce the things that people don't like about Donald Trump. The selfishness, all of that, right? It's indicative of why he wasn't able to respond adequately and competently to COVID, which I think probably sealed his fate. And so, again, if he really wanted the money, if he had a sincere, passionate, principled belief in it, he could have fought for it. But as it is, this is just him and the 11th hour coming in, actually the 12th hour coming in, blowing something up, and I think causing problems for his own team. Is this revenge for Mitch McConnell? And he's going after John Thune, and I think he very well could take down Perdue and Loeffler.
Now, to your point about deficits be damned, I think if Trump in October if there was a Pelosi, Mnuchin, Trump deal that was $1.8 trillion or $2 trillion or whatever it was, they sealed it. They came out together. They had a joint appearance. Here it is. We agree. Here you go, Mitch. that would put a lot of pressure on McConnell to salute. I mean, he was telling Trump at the time, don't put me in that position. I don't know if I can deliver you the votes in that position. I got a lot of people who have found their inner deficit hawk and aren't going to vote for something that big. And Trump did his general, capricious, inconsistent, tap dance, and so you never know what you were getting with him, and so no deal got done. But if there was an actual deal that was announced, legislation printed, and the only person standing in the way is Mitch McConnell, in that circumstance, I think McConnell might have cracked. And the evidence of that is what happened after the election. And Trump's not even involved here, but when you had Manchin and Romney and Cassidy and Murkowski come out and say, we have a $908 billion deal, and immediately Pelosi and Schumer say, we're on board. Now the obstacle is McConnell. And we all talk about McConnell as this massive obstructionist, and he obviously has been many a time, but he's not going to be if there is a perceived political cost of obstruction. When it's McConnell versus Obama, and Obama is the president, and Obama's running on, I'm going to bring the country together, McConnell shrewdly concluded, well, if I don't cooperate, you get the blame and not me. You can say all day long that it's my fault, but no one's going to believe you because you're the president of the United States. In the previous scenario that didn't happen, the president is on board with Pelosi. McConnell can't do that. Now you have, in the lame duck period, you have a hard-fought bipartisan agreement with Democratic leaders on board. McConnell can't say, don't blame me, blame Donald Trump. It's still pretty much on him. And so he said, okay, I'm going to futz with it. I'm going to futz with this deal, but I'm not going to get in the way with it. Now I wrote about this I have a piece at the Washington Monthly. So the first time I've been in the Washington Monthly.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Congrats on that.
Thank you very much. Bernie Sanders comes in after Manchin and Romney, et cetera, have this deal. Because the Manchin-Romney deal has no direct checks. It is mostly about extending unemployment and helping small business. Sanders comes in with Josh Hawley on the Republican side saying we need direct checks that go to most everybody. I think the threshold is $75,000, or there's some lesser amounts above that income threshold. So most everybody gets something. And so that's spread a lot more thinly than unemployment insurance extensions, which are concentrated, larger payments to the people most in need. And there's some progressive economists like Krugman and Dean Baker that said, these one-time direct payments are not as potent as extended unemployment insurance. Those folks really need it, and you'll get more macroeconomic bang for the buck. But there is a populist popularity with everybody gets a check that Sanders glommed onto and Hawley glommed onto. And Mitch McConnell concluded, I don't want to get in the way of that either. That's not going to be a good look. If I deny people these, if Bernie and Hawley prevent, because with unanimous consent procedures, they could drag things out by raising a fuss, go past Christmas. So McConnell clearly said, I don't want to go past Christmas without a bill, with Bernie and Hawley in my grill saying it's my fault that I won't give people checks. But you have this bipartisan centrist gang putting a cap on the overall price tag. They're the ones saying we're not doing this we're not going to $1 trillion. I don't care what you do. And so what ended up happening was they shave off the unemployment insurance extension. They make that shorter to help get the direct checks, and they're at a smaller price than Sanders and Hawley wanted. So there's some minor grumbling all around, but they still agree to do the deal. Bernie is not being rigid. He's compromising. He's being pragmatic. He's being flexible. I don't know if Trump can come in at this stage, ask for more than double the size of the checks, and blow the price tag. That's not evident that is possible for him. You still might have this bipartisan, essentially the center of gravity in the Senate, saying there is no way, no how we're going over $1 trillion. So if we have real negotiations on that point, we'll see if there is give there or not. But that's where we really don't know. We don't know if Trump has the juice to force an opening of the negotiations at all. And if it is reopened, does he have the juice to raise that cap and actually say deficits be damned? Those are all unknowns at this point to me.
Okay, but I do want to push you because I think you probably have a good sense of what's going to happen. Like, do you have a prediction on how you think this plays out?
I think there's not enough time to reopen negotiations. The intent, there's literal days. Mind you, the goal here was to have this done before Christmas, so there weren't stories about people being left hanging during Christmas. So between now and Friday, there's going to be pressure put on Trump. Say, you're going to be the Grinch if you don't sign this bill. You can sign this bill and ask for more money, the next day. Mm-hmm. But you better sign this damn bill. Now, again, I can't predict what Trump's going to do. But I think we're at least there's going to be no magical deal before Friday with $2,000 checks in it. Now you're past Christmas, and I think Congress adjourns January 3rd. So we have literally 9 days to have an agreement and convince people who don't want to spend more money to spend more money, which is not at all a certainty, and get through all the various, procedural hurdles that, take up a certain amount of days. So I'm not the Senate rules expert.
Okay, so there's not enough time. So then what? What happens? If Trump
doesn't sign the bill and there's no deal by January 3rd, you start from scratch. They have to literally start over. Trump's still president in the new Congress for a couple of weeks, but the old bill dies and you have to write a new bill. Now you can just take the old bill off the shelf and plop it down and say, let's start here. But there's some procedural rigmarole to get that through, and so maybe Trump,
and there's going to be more. The new Congress is actually going to be more Republican.
More right? Republican on the House side, a little less so on the Senate side. And we don't know what's happening with the Georgia runoffs yet.
So does that make it easier or harder to spend money?
Well, I don't know if that makes that big of a difference, because I think you have a hawkish strain on the Republican side anyway. If you have a deal that has buy-in from Pelosi, Schumer, McConnell, Trump, presumably you can get over that. But again, Manchin, Romney, et cetera, have to agree to stay within certain fiscal parameters. So that could, in theory, get accomplished before January 20th. But you have lost. There was a certain pressure now to do this by Christmas. That pressure goes away once you're past Christmas.
Isn't there like a debt ceiling coming up, or some sort of other deadline we've got?
I don't know when the debt ceiling deadline is
approaching. Maybe it's not the debt ceiling, but it's like not just. In other words, not just a COVID bill, but some other.
Well, the government shutdown. This bill right now, the one that's on Trump's desk, is also an omnibus bill. It's not just a relief bill, and it has all the stuff that says the government stays open, I think, past December 29th.
So for example, vaccine. Would this affect distribution of a vaccine potentially? Right. That presumably that could.
I don't know how much of it is happening on the public watch or on the private watch at this point, but you're probably right on that score. So excuse me for not incorporating that into all my game theory mapping out. But you do have the shutdown deadline pressure point. But I'm guessing if they don't do a deal by the 25th, I don't know if they can work it all out by the 29th so easily. So then you're in a shutdown period And so there will be some pressure to solve things from that point forward because all the other things that would go haywire.
I'm not sure the mail could go any slower. I don't know if that would affect the Postal Service, but I don't think it would matter much based on. Have you tried mailing stuff, Bill? I have something headed. I've got a Christmas present headed to you.
Is that right?
That you probably haven't gotten yet.
Oh, well, now, one, I've not gotten, and two, now I feel guilty that you don't have something from me. So
it's not gonna break the bank, my friend.
All right, maybe I need to get a New Year's gift for you now.
No, we don't need to. We don't need to get into that.
So anyway, there would be this extra pressure hanging over things because we'd be in shutdown period that could make things eventually work, but it'd be heavily messy, and the possibility exists that they don't work it out at all by January 20th. So it just becomes very, very uncertain and unstable, and I don't know. I don't think anyone can predict how it comes out.
So he probably caves in, right?
If he's going to cave, he would cave. He would cave before shutdown deadline and probably by Christmas to not be the Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
I think he probably caves. He can cave and still complain and blame everybody else, right?
I mean that's largely been his MO about these things. He signed lots of things and then bitched about the day after.
Yeah. I mean, why would this be different? Although, and maybe he just doesn't care anymore about anything. You never know. There's always the madman aspect to Trump, but I suspect he caves.
But there's also the fact that he is at least entertaining the possibility of running again. So he's not just a lame duck walking out the door and can trash the place before he leaves. Someone's going to be whispering in his ear, if you're the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, you can forget 2024.
Maybe. He's defied. I mean, he's done so many things. Like, okay, let's go to the pardons, for example. Now, I know that a lot of presidents have done controversial pardons on their way out the door, but nobody's come close to the kinds of pardons that Donald Trump has done his entire administration. And the reason presidents haven't done that is, maybe a little bit of it's patriotic, but by and large, there was just an assumption that they would pay a political price, that pardoning people who were unseemly or political cronies, that there would be a backlash and that it would harm their legacy, their reputation, or possibly their reelection. But Trump did that. And look, does anybody think that pardoning Joe Arpaio hurt him in his reelection bid? Like, that was like, if you stacked up the million things that Trump has done that were controversial, like, I don't know where that fits in on the list, but it's not even certainly not top 10, right?
Well, but you stack up the million things that Trump did, and he lost his reelection campaign. So
right.
These things eventually did catch up to him. Now, they don't hurt him with his base. He still has a very loyal base, and that is enough to be intimidating to other Republicans. So, usually you're a lame duck and you have no political juice because you're a spent force. But so long as he is a live political candidate with a very devout set of supporters, he's not a lame duck.
Yeah.
And so that kind of selfishness, that corruption, that self-dealing, we know that doesn't disturb his base. We don't know if other Republicans voting to give you money that Trump then denies you, if that's on a different order than everything else that has transpired to date with his own base.
I've touched on this before, Bill, but I also think, let's go full circle back to where we started, the dynasty thing matters too. Like, even if you thought Donald Trump wasn't going to run again, the fact that he's got Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, Jared, and what's her name from Fox News, got this brood, and God knows when Barron makes his arrival on the political scene, but he's got this brood, And they're going to be out there like running the NRA or whatever they're doing, maybe running for president themselves. Like, I think that buys him protection as well. I don't know if any, I mean, I'm trying to think if anyone else, I mean, I don't think anybody thought George W. Bush was going to be president when Poppy Bush was was on the scene. The Kennedys obviously had a dynasty, but I just don't know if this is what the precedent is for this. But I do think that Trump has, even if he were a lame duck, he would never be a lame duck. He wouldn't let himself be.
I mean, I assume Trump and Trumps will want to remain in the spotlight, till the end of time. I have a piece that's not out yet. I'm sure it's going to come out till next week. I'm doing a gaming ad of 2024 for Politico. And so I put a little bit of thought into, where does Trump go from here? How do you know Trump's really running or not? We know, he's teasing it, but there's also some mixed messages being sent out too. I think it's fair to say that Trump would probably have the nomination if he wants it, but he could conclude, if I'm just going to get humiliated again in the general election, maybe I don't want it. I'd rather just leave everybody believing in my circles that I really want it was stolen from me and not prove the point a second time that that's not really the case. So we know Trump will stay in the spotlight. We know he'll say things, but how far is he going to go to keep his people in key posts in the RNC? How far is he going to go taking swipes at other Republicans who might run for president? How many primaries is he going to get involved in? Or is he going to...
Well, apparently Bill Stepien, his campaign manager, I guess relaunched his public affairs firm, and Trump is going to be a client, or their big project, I guess, is going to be going after, supporting Trump's friends in 2022 and punishing his enemies. I
mean, if Trump follows through on that, then you think, okay, he wants to be a major political actor for the foreseeable future. If he starts talking in earnest with NBC about restarting The Apprentice, then maybe that's not what's top of mind for him. Daily Beast had a report saying he's been musing about bringing back The Apprentice. So, he can only do so many things. Perhaps someone could argue, well, he could do The Apprentice for 2 years and still run for president again. Maybe. But I think if you are...
what they should do is have it be The Apprentice campaign, where the campaign manager, people vie, celebrity campaign manager.
Well, then you use real campaigns. You use Real House campaigns for it, which was literally firing and hiring your actual campaign staff as part of the TV show. I would think if you're getting deeper,
I'm going to need you to organize a lit drop. I can't do the accent, but I do think that there could be something there.
I think he could do some of both, I guess. But if you're spending the lion's share of your time on TV shows, on real estate deals, on licensing and branding opportunities, and you're not doing quite as much of the party meddling, perhaps you're signaling, where your head really is at. Gotcha.
Okay. Well, I think I know you got a heart out here. So seeing as how this is the last DMZ of 2020, some years, Bill, in the past, there have been years where it was pretty slow this time of year, and we just made the whole last episode we had different categories: who won the year, who's up, who's down, best pop song of the year. I don't know. We had all sorts of categories. Obviously, this year there's it will not quit, and there's no lack of news, but. Any just reflection, thoughts? What's the best piece, your best take from the year, your worst take from the year, or a big takeaway from the year that was Bill Scher?
Well, Matt and I, you and I, we've been doing this for over a decade. And many a year-end show is me talking about what I got wrong. But let's face it, Matt, this is my year. This is, one grand slam after another, calling it from practically start to finish. I was bullish on Biden when almost no one else was.
True.
I was down on Beto before anybody else was. I was skeptical on Pete, the whole way through.
And you did predict he would be transportation secretary.
In May of 2019, I said he was on excellent track to be transportation secretary, but that was part and parcel of this guy's not going to be president of the United States, and he's not going to be vice president of the United States. So where's the logical place that he ends up? And when people were not taking Kamala Harris as seriously for VP, I was bullish on her for VP. So I certainly understood the Democratic electorate better than a lot of other people did, including many presidential candidates and their campaign teams who presumed.
Sure. Who's the senator for Gillibrand and Harris and Beto? They went to the left when Bill Scher said no. Do not go that far out.
And I also said early on, South Carolina is more important than Iowa.
Yes, and you got into a dispute with Joe Trippi.
Well, a mild one. And some folks got that. Kamala and Booker were trying to crack into South Carolina. They did recognize its importance and got very frustrated that they couldn't seem to get inroads in the African-American community there because of Joe Biden. And most of the other white candidates said, well, that's going to be Joe Biden, so forget it. And, that should have been a real red flag to everybody that, maybe you're not going to win this thing because you need South Carolina. And people still got, topsy-turvy about Iowa and New Hampshire, and not that they were unimportant states, but those states have not been the ball game and were not the ball game this time around. And that speaks to the electorate of the Democratic Party. What drives the electorate? And the African-American vote is a huge factor in the delegate count of the electorate. And that African-American vote is more moderate than a lot of people assume going into this campaign. Those are the twin things that the winning campaign, I think, intrinsically understood. So I have all that going for me. After the primary, I said everyone was like, oh, Biden's digital game is terrible. Trump's running circles around him on the internet. And I said, who cares? And I was proven right on that score. Now, where I faltered at the end, Matt, there's a little faltering at the end, was I took the polls a little bit too literally. I assumed that the rising pandemic in the final days would give Biden a bit of an extra oomph at the end, and maybe Biden will overperform his polling. And so I assumed a higher popular vote margin. I thought Biden would take Iowa and North Carolina and Florida, as well as Arizona and Georgia. And I thought Democrats would take the Senate on election night as well. And one of my less certain predictions was that we would know about Florida, that Biden would win either Florida, North Carolina, or Georgia on the night of, which I mostly assume would be Florida, because I thought everything was going to there'd be a general blue shift to Biden coast to coast, because you're seeing that in almost every poll, even like West Virginia or Nebraska or what have you. And Florida was a very close state in 2016. It wouldn't take that much to tip it to the left. And what I did not factor in, was that Florida would be one of the few states to get redder. I mean, you only had, I think, 4 or 5 states.
I know, and because it was called very early, that made a lot of. I mean, if Florida goes different, Trump probably couldn't even have been contesting the election.
Right.
Because the fact that Florida went his way early in the night really set the tone and gave the impression that Trump was going to win.
Right. And connected to that dynamic, the thing that also I did not anticipate. I mean, I thought I never discounted Trump might do a little bit better with people of color communities, but I think the breadth of that was broader than I expected, and it carried over into certain House races. The two Asian American women that won in Southern California in heavily Asian districts. I did not think the two Cuban-heavy districts in Southern Florida would flip to Republicans, and I did not think that you'd see Latino votes trending right in places like Massachusetts. So those were things I did not anticipate.
Well, very few people anticipated that.
And then, and the thing that sort of irks me, and so, someone correct me if I'm wrong here, there are definitely people out there with their hair on fire saying Biden was weak with Latinos and Hispanics. Biden needs better Latino Hispanic outreach. Maybe you should have had whether it's campaign there more, do more door knocking, have a Latina VP or whatever it was. There was a lot of that criticism percolating in the final weeks. But I did not hear of any during that time before the election that the specific problem was they think you're a socialist or they think you're a pedophile. Because there's a combination of the socialist attacks and the more scurrilous misinformation that was being spread around. So you weren't hearing the activists who were complaining on the left saying, hey, Joe Biden, be more conservative. Be more explicitly anti-socialist so you'll stop this bleeding in Latino communities. No one was saying that at the time. But I think
I do think that didn't Caputo at Politico have a piece about a week or two before the election warning about how Miami Cubans were being turned off to socialist messaging from the left, from the Democratic.
Yeah, he did, but I don't think anybody inside the Democratic Party, the people who were complaining the most that Biden was not doing proper Latino outreach, they were not communicating to him within that outreach. Please tell these people that you're not a socialist. That and even now that's being resisted in some quarters. Even though I think there's a lot of data to suggest that is a serious problem. I mean, again, Biden still won with Latinos overall, won with African Americans overall, but you have these pockets of discontent that might have been a bigger deal if Biden was not doing so well with white suburbanites, right-leaning suburbanites. So it's a weird dichotomy because I think the college-educated vote saw Biden and said, oh, I know you're not a socialist. I know you're not AOC. But the more working-class vote and that working-class non-college vote across racial lines was more open to Biden is a socialist or will be rolled by the socialists or is part of cancel culture or is part of this, scientist conspiracy to take away our freedoms and then make me put on masks. I don't want to wear masks. Donald Trump didn't wear a mask and he beat COVID. I can beat it too. All that kind of stuff seems to not had more currency across racial lines in non-college communities than it did in college-educated communities.
Yeah. So you had a good year in terms of the takes, clearly.
And where do you think you stand, Matt?
I think I had a good year in terms of the takes, with one exception, with one notable exception. So I've been, as you know, like you, Bill, I've been beating the drum. I've been beating the drum consistently that Democrats should nominate Biden because I just thought Biden was the most electable Democrat. And so I was pretty consistent on making the case that turned out to be true about Joe Biden. But when Biden lost New Hampshire and Iowa, I gave up on him.
You buckled.
I did. I did not think that he could come back because he had clearly lost a step. He was rusty. And I just didn't believe that he could forge a comeback. I always thought he was the best general election opponent, but there was a couple days there where it looked very much like Bernie Sanders was going. People forget this. There was 3 or 4 days probably where the smart money was on Bernie Sanders. Like, it looked like Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee. And I wrote one of those hot takes where I said, everybody should get behind Amy Klobuchar right now. Right? And imagine if Democrats had taken my advice at that moment. I mean, I always thought Biden was the better candidate. I thought Biden should have won, but there was a point where I thought Biden had flamed out and that it just wasn't going to happen.
I mean, the problem with that take, and I'm not trying to pick on you here, but I think in people's, because there was that Klobuchar moment when she did better than expected in New Hampshire, and
this was admittedly a moment of desperation.
So this is after Pete Buttigieg, barely wins Iowa, although some Bernie folks still dispute that, depending how you want to. Based on delegates or based on popular vote or what have you. But Buttigieg got a bit of momentum coming out of Iowa. It doesn't fully materialize in New Hampshire because Klobuchar has a burst of energy. And in my mind, this was showing the fundamental weaknesses of both candidacies. Neither one was really getting beyond. Neither one was the wine track candidate. They were dividing the wine track.
Yeah.
And they still had shown no traction in people of color communities heading into Nevada and South Carolina. So there wasn't a chance for one of them to be having consolidated any kind of faction to make a case to people of color in those states. And that's why I wasn't ready to write Biden off, because I knew there were enough moderates in the party.
And then, am I right? Did Bernie won Nevada? Is that right?
So Bernie won Nevada.
Right. So
and New Hampshire, mind you.
Right. And so, and Nevada was on Saturday, right?
Correct.
So then 2 days later is South Carolina.
No. So it was the following Saturday.
Or was it 10 days, like 9 days later?
I don't know if it was 1 week or 2 weeks. They're both Saturday races.
Oh, okay. Okay. But so Bernie, that's probably, I guess Nevada's the moment where it feels like Bernie has the momentum. And Biden, not only does Biden not have, like he hasn't won any of the contests.
But he came in, but he came in second in Nevada. So that was a beginning of a regaining of his footing. And a way to show that.
Well, he was trying Marco Rubio's 3-2-1 strategy.
But again, you have to understand that the Democratic electorate is not that left, that there's a healthy, moderate faction, arguably a majority faction, that is also heavily African American. And for Pete and Amy to be unable...
You were preaching this the whole time. Right. You were right, Bill. You were.
So but for Pete and Amy to not be able to...
When's the last time somebody won the nomination without winning, New Hampshire or Iowa?
I think it was Clinton.
And 92.
And a somewhat similar path, because Clinton was getting beat by a wine track candidate in Paul Tsongas in Iowa and New Hampshire. And it wasn't until they got to Georgia, because South Carolina wasn't early back then. I think there were 6 contests before they got to Georgia, if I remember correctly. Although after Iowa and New Hampshire, they were kind of small contests. And it wasn't until you got to the South, then more white moderates and black moderates to weigh in and say, who the hell is this Paul Tsongas guy? Clinton, that's the kind of guy I know. That's the kind of guy I can connect with.
But this almost plays into my argument for why I lost faith in Biden, because Bill Clinton was a Southerner, and Bill Clinton had this amazing charisma, which, maybe you didn't see back then, possible that it wasn't appreciated back then, but he was young too. And so I just didn't think, I felt like Biden had needed to do better. And I gave up on him. I did. I gave up on him. You never did.
Biden was the most Southern option. in this Democratic primary. Delaware is kind of quasi-Southern. Biden had the experience in campaigning in those racially mixed neighborhoods. People, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, didn't have the same kind of experiences. Bernie didn't have the same kind of experiences. Warren didn't have the same kind of experiences. And even Harris and Booker being African American, they're still relatively new figures. They're still, New Jersey, California. They still hadn't spent a lot of time in the South, and they didn't have the same kind of relationships that Biden had developed over the years. So all these things came together to say, look, don't write the guy off yet, because there isn't an obvious alternative to Bernie going into South Carolina, and all Biden needed to do was to say, I am the alternative. I'm still the alternative. And Clyburn, of course, helped with that with the big endorsement.
Big time. Clyburn. Bill, I'm putting together a piece for the Beast where I name my heroes of my the frontline workers and the people the scientists who created the vaccine. They're probably the big heroes, but I'm doing my political heroes, and these are people who made a difference this year by standing up to their own side. So, like, for example, the Georgia Secretary of State is on my list, right? Is it Poffensperger?
Raffensperger.
That's it. Thanks, Bill. I'm a better writer.
HR Puffin stuff.
Writing than talking sometimes. But Jim Clyburn is on my list as well. So stay tuned for that. Raffensperger, the P.
I want to circle back to me being right about stuff one last time before we call it a year.
I think you really need, because this may not happen again.
Exactly. So I'm going to milk every last drop.
Revel in this.
So we're a little premature here, so I can't quite do a victory lap, but I wrote all year I've been saying bipartisanship is still possible. And this was tied into the Biden candidacy and him preaching bipartisanship. And through most of the year, all the guff I got was, this is nonsense. Republicans can't be cooperative, won't want to be cooperative. It's a sucker's game, usually pulling the football. You're setting yourself up for failure. Biden's going to humiliate himself if that's what he tries to do. And then as the campaign went on, then you had people saying, okay, maybe this is a fine campaign message. Maybe people want to hear it. So Biden's fine in saying it, but he's got to know he's stupid to pursue it. He should be trying to do a nuclear option. He should be trying to get rid of the filibuster. He should be packing the court. He doesn't want to have his hands tied when he gets in there and have a bankrupt presidency. And I'm not even arguing that somehow it's going to be easy or simple for this to happen. I'm only arguing that it's necessary for legislation to get passed and to stick. So here we are, top of December, and you have this Manchin-Romney thing. And I had a piece in Real Clear saying, this is how it's supposed to work. You have people step up on both sides. They create a tension around their idea, and they put pressure on the system to come their way. And again, Bernie Sanders on the left, he puts his stamp on it, but he gets in the game. Mitch McConnell puts his stamp on it, but he gets in the game. And you end up having a final bill, which might get thrown off the rails because of Donald Trump. But you still see the outlines of how this can and should work.
Yeah.
And so,
and Donald Trump's not going to be there. And
so this is what we don't. It's why I can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But the notion that this can work is more alive than ever. People like Romney and Collins and Murkowski and Cassidy, maybe some others now, might say, hey, if we do this same thing, we can get the media attention, we'll get backup from President Biden, and we can put pressure on fellow Republicans to say, look, you're going to want to look bad if you don't get on board here. There's a cost to obstruction, a bigger cost than in 2009, 2010, 2013, et cetera. So get with the program. Now that still cuts against, I think, the diehard Trumpers in the Republican base. I also wrote about the fact that a lot of Republicans are saying, we don't need an autopsy. We don't need to fix anything. We grew the party. We can be a working class party. It was close. It was stolen. We can win back the House next year. We don't have to make big adjustments. I mean, that's part of this story, too. So I'm not arguing that, like, everything's falling into place here. But you can see the path. You can see the path of bipartisanship that I think Biden is going to want to drive. And I think certain senators who don't want to just sit around and pull wax out of their ears are going to say, look, I want to get in the game here and get some stuff done. I see how it can happen now. So what
I like about this is during the darkest days, literally the darkest time of the year, Bill Scher is bringing light and hope to millions with his message of bipartisanship and centrism. And I was a doubter. I was a skeptic. I wasn't a believer in this, Bill, but I'm starting to believe. And have hope. And we could have a brighter future.
I mean, I don't want to argue, and I would argue that this will happen. It is a certainty that glorious bipartisanship awaits us, because there's all sorts of obstacles that could still, thwart it. And even if it's achieved, I can't even promise you that what it produces is going to be so great, because sometimes compromises can be very penny ante and not solve problems. But I think you can start to argue more credibly now that maybe every individual Republican is not exactly the same as the other Republicans. Maybe Bill Cassidy is not the same as Ted Cruz. Maybe it's worth getting on the phone and talking to individual people and seeing what their asks are. Because the argument against doing this is that it's a brick wall of obstruction, so you'll look the fool if you say you can do it and you can't do it. And I think that cynicism risks communicating to you end up not getting anything, because you're essentially saying it's not possible, and you go into the midterms literally having produced nothing. That to me is the biggest risk of all. So you want to. So yes, there's risks, there's chances you'll fail, but it's the lower risk to try, and now we see there are people that are potentially open for business.
Love it. Merry Christmas, Bill Scher.
Merry Christmas to you, and a happy Kwanzaa for those who celebrate. Hanukkah is over. Hope you had a good Hanukkah for those who celebrated. We did. We had good donuts and good latkes and good dreidel.
Excellent. I like the. I'm curious about the Die Hard. I think you might have said this on the DM Zoom or was it in the big DMZ that Die Hard is a Hanukkah movie? But I like the idea.
That tweet was making the rounds. The miracle, the scrappy army with minimal resources pulling it out at the end of the day.
Yeah, they didn't have they didn't have fuel.
It's
right?
Sufficient oil, yeah, right.
And Bruce Willis didn't have shoes.
Exactly.
So I mean, it writes itself. Let's see. So we're done for the year, and no DM Zoom this week.
Well, I'm not sure when DMZ Junior can occur. Maybe that happens in the holiday break. I don't know, but so be on the lookout for when DMZ Junior happens.
Did I just say product? We will have the show in the new year, I think. But I like it. I like the idea.
Final plug, the new history podcast, When America Worked. If you haven't downloaded yet, you haven't subscribed to it yet, please do. Please review it on iTunes or your favorite podcast service. I also did an interview with the history podcast Road to Now. So please listen to that. And I got a very nice plug for my friend David Reese, who does a podcast called Election Profit Makers, who started talking about me and bringing up Pete Buttigieg, because he really had money on Buttigieg not being in the cabinet, and he lost money, so he was haranguing his co-host for giving him bad advice and saying you should listen to Bill Scher. And that also got into
let me tell you something. If in 2020, if you bet with Bill Scher, you made money.
2021 might have be a different story.
How you feeling about the Washington football team, Bill, going into the playoffs? Should I put some money down? You have a hot hand this year.
I know nothing what's going on with football except that but the Patriots are out, right? Finally, the Patriots are out.
I know nothing about football this year either, but I don't think they had a good season, of course, because they didn't have Tom Brady. So who would expect them to have a good year without Tom Brady? Everyone knows that Tom Brady made that team.
I did see one article saying this proves that Bill Belichick's not so.
Well, that was always the thing, right? Was it the system or was it the quarterback? Belichick did great when there were years where Brady was injured and Belichick did well and the Patriots did well, but I guess we now know the answer to that question, and it's I just root for old guys, Bill. I'm at the age where if you're old, I'm rooting for you. It's the Jimmy Connors effect. You might remember that from tennis. So that's the way I go.
I was always a Connors fan.
Old guys rule, especially. So, but again, there is time to hand it over to the next generation, and we're going to do that as well. So, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and what could people do though if they want to support long form conversation, Bill?
Well, they can always support us on Patreon. That's a wonderful holiday gift. But again, giving me the subscription and the reviews to When America Worked and supporting the podcast in that way is just as good a Christmas gift. And
I think that based on what we've seen this year, America could work again. And so there's the fact that you did this podcast about When America Works and that we've just had this uplifting conversation completely dovetails. I think the universe is telling people they have to rate and review 5 stars and download this thing.
And of course, if you like long form conversation, they should hear the Matt Lewis in the News podcast.
They should do that. I just re-aired last Christmas. David Petrugia, our friend, and I did an episode where we talked about history that happened on Christmas. So we talked about Washington crossing the Delaware. We talked about the World War I Christmas truce. What else? Oh, we also talked about Winston Churchill spending Christmas Eve in 1941 with Franklin Roosevelt in your nation's capital, Bill. So check that podcast out. It's a greatest hits episode.
Fantastic. All right. Well, have a great year, great New Year, and I'll see you on the other side.
You got it. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, and see you, Bill Scher.